So today's topic is a very interesting one and something that is highly likely a topic that will get asked in interviews because making your React application efficient and and performant so that people can quickly visit it is important, as well as making it cheaper for yourself to run as well. So the less cost you have to bear, run your React application, the better the what do you call the money you learn from the application, right? So let's look at this. On your laptop, there's a React application running, and you want to get. So this is assume this is a GitHub, right? So this server is a GitHub. If you guys are familiar, you all tend to check in your code in GitHub, so you all have your own repos on the GitHub, and you are also individual users on the GitHub. So GitHub has many things, but let's focus on two things. GitHub has users as well as repos. So you are now building an application to get details about GitHub users and their repos. Well, you can call an API which GitHub server offers you to get these details. These APIs, while free, have a limit. So individually, you cannot continue to hit these APIs and continue fetching the details. But internally, what happens is the GitHub then goes to a database, GitHub server, and gets the details that you asked for and sends you back. This line, right? GitHub sends you back. This is the line you are requesting the detail from GitHub. And this is the line where GitHub is querying the detail for you from the database. So we have three different flows. Finally, the details reaching to you. So let's look at our application for today before we jump much, right? So here is an application where if you type something, let's say we type name John, it goes to GitHub and fetches all the users who have John in their name. So this is a real API going against real GitHub. How do you know? You go here to your network tab, you open your developer tools, and you open your network tab and look at the URL that was requested. And you see whatever query we are typing is getting called to this API. And this API then gives me back this 5, 6 different Johns. We are taking from this API the name of the person as well as their avatar URL and just displaying it. So it's a fairly straightforward requirement, but GitHub blocks you from accessing their API beyond certain number of requests per minute or per hour. Before we dive into our topic, any questions in this flow? What we are doing with GitHub and what we are displaying in our application? So if you realize in this flow, let's first look at this page. This page in our React code terminologies is divided into two things. One is a parent component, which is called app.js, our app.jsx, which has this search box and this button. and we have child component, which is a user uh, user card, which displays this image and John's photos. So quickly, if you look at our code, we have our app.jsx and user card. Simple. So our user card takes an individual user and displays his details. So this is individual user, this first John, and we are displaying their name and login. Similarly, the job of ignore the commented codes for now. The job of the app.jsx is when somebody types something in our input box, we call that input box variable as query. When somebody types into the input box, we take that value and use fetch API call to get the data and then have our state variable, which is users. We save the data that we got from APIs into our user. So we have, if I have to go here and explain, we have a variable called user, and then we are doing a fetch call here. Let's put it here. We have a user here. Then we are doing a fetch call to API, fetch API. And here on this line, we get the um, response back. So this is our application that is doing this, all these activities of calling GitHub's API and displaying the users on the UI. I feel like I'm going too fast. Anybody has any questions?
Can you
Feel free
repeat
to
that?
stop me. Say again.
Can you repeat that, what you just said, that sentence?
I feel like I'm going too fast
Oh,
and
no,
there are no.
no, sorry. What you just said before that.
Yes, so
Sorry.
that's okay. Uh, so in our application, the page that we are seeing, we are typing user. That means we are initializing our state variable, uh, which is called query, the state variable query. And we are saving the value of the typed input, which is John in this case, in our query. And then we are taking that query variable and calling useEffect hook. And within the useEffect hook, we are calling GitHub's API to get the details of the users who have named John. So if I go back to my diagram, we are typing a user here, which is equal to John in our UI. And we are calling this API on GitHub with user equal to John. So it's a straightforward, what do you call, the process of calling the API that we saw, I think the class before, where we were doing the stock price search, if you guys remember. And GitHub in request of this query, it gives me list of users. It gives me list of users here, and then I take that list of users and display on the my UI using a component a second component called useCard. Does the does the flow make sense? Or you guys want me to explain again? I'm happy to explain again. We haven't started our topics, the real topics that we want to discuss today, but it is important for you guys to understand this flow so that the topics that we learn today make complete sense to you. Otherwise, what will happen is the topics themselves will not make much sense to you because you will be like, what is happening? So if you see in our application, there is, let me draw a new box. In our application, we have this component, app component, and within the app component, so let me put this word outside. Within our app components, there are multiple child components. This is first John, this is the second John. So these are user one. So within our application, we have this component structure. But besides the user components, I also have a button as well in my application. I have a button here, but the button and this user one and two that we see on the screen, which is our Johns. So I have this buttons and these 5 users have no relation to each other. So when I click on the button, nothing changes about any of the Johns. Nothing changes about the Johns. Still, if you see, if I look at uh, my component, every time I click on uh, any of the John, if I click on the button, all of these 5 John components got re-rendered. That means they got repainted on the UI. How do I know? Because I placed the strategic console log function inside my user card. So every time this code runs, I know that something happened. So every time I'm clicking, I'm seeing the code is running. That is a big performance issue. While nothing changed about the name of any of the John or avatar image of any of the John, completely unrelated act on my application changed or re-triggered the rendering of my child components. Why that happened? Well, because the button that we have is tied to the button that we have is tied to a state variable in our application in our parent component. So this button is tied to a state variable count. And because the state variable count change, parent component is triggering a refresh and the child component just purely acts on parent's component's logic. And it says, hey, because the parent, something changed in the parent and it is needing a re-render, I should re-render as well. But technically, nothing changed about any of these Johns. So the before and after display of my child component has no differences. So to prevent that, React offers something called memo function. Memo means memo short form is memoization. Memoization means remembering something, remembering. And in this case, the remembering is remembering my previous details, previous details. So my previous details are the name is John and the avatar image is this potato image. So these are my previous details. If nothing changes in my previous detail, then I don't need to do anything or I don't need to re-render. So to simply to simply use memo, we can type memo function and our code gets wrapped in. So this, if I make this clear, right? Did I have it here? Yeah, I think I might have it already here. So this was our previous function. And in this function, let me revert this back so you guys have both the versions. You guys have both the versions to play with when you have. So in this is the same component. And all I did was I took the entire code that was there previously and put it inside a memo function. And now let's see what happens. Let me first change the wiring. I use the new component. And let's do the same thing, same behavior. Let's clean our and let's first load our John. So we got our Johns back. Now let's do the unrelated event of clicking on the button. And if you see, now we are not getting this console logs that we were getting because my use card component is remembering its previous state, which is the name and the avatar image. And if nothing is changing, then it skips re-rendering. And this makes the React application become fast by many percentages, especially when used in production level applications. So memo is one of our first topics, and it acts on component. So memo acts on component. So memo is acts on, or I can say a component, acts on a component. Similarly, React provides many more, especially two very useful such hooks for calculations as well as functions themselves. So what do I mean by that? So if you see in our application, we are not displaying all the users we get from GitHub back. So if I go back to my network and if I look at my response, I got 29 Johns, 29. I displayed only 5 because I calculated the value here please give me the value 0 to 5 only, and don't give me everything. To reduce the recalculations, right? React offers something called a useMemo hook. So useMemo hook, if you look at the code, let me actually make updates here, but I'll keep both the versions so you guys can go back and refer to. So even before we do that, right? So let me comment this code and let's look at what is happening today. So what do I mean by that? That React recalculates, right? So let's load our Johns. Okay. So if I come here, I'm getting this log user recalculated. So my function is running and it's recalculating my users. Now let me do something which is unrelated, which is a counter. Every time I'm again doing an act which is unrelated to the calculation of number of users that need to be displayed, clicking on that button has no effect on number of users we are going to display. We are always going to show only 5 users and not more. This act of calculation is not changing no matter how many times I click on this button. But every time I do, this function call is running. And in the world of computers for sure, right? Anything that is calculating or anything that is rerunning is an extra cost, especially when you guys start to think of your applications which are running in cloud. On your laptop also, the extra cost is your electricity bill. Even if it's a fraction of cent, this 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 compounds to multiple hundreds of dollars if you're having a big website and if you're having a really complex calculation. So to reduce this, React offers us useMemo, useMemo hook. We have seen hooks before. So first, let's look at the useMemo. Let's put this. So let's count our johns. And we are getting user gray calculated useMemo correctly because every time I am searching, I have to recalculate. Did I get 29? Did I get 30? I have to recalculate. So that is a related event when you're trying to display something that is related. But let's do an unrelated task of clicking the button. Now, clicking this button has no impact on the uh, recalculation of number of users to be displayed. This way, you can make your application much more performant again. So we looked at use memo and now we are looking at we looked at memo and this is a use memo. So the difference between this is use memo and I'm going to bring the other line back. Use memo is for reducing duplicate uh, calculations, So this is acting on duplicate calculations. And the memo that we saw earlier is, let me put here so you guys see the difference, is for reducing re-renders of a component of an child component. So these terms are very similar in names. It can get little confusing. This is a function itself. Memo is a function, but you guys might have guessed it correctly by looking at the name. useMemo is a React hook, just like useEffect or use date hooks that we have seen. Now, the next, before I jump to the third hook, any questions on any of these hooks? I know we're jumping all over the place, sometimes code, sometimes um, application. So stop me if you guys get confused. It's important for you guys to think in terms of this. So useMemo is for reducing duplicate calculations, and memo is for reducing duplicate component re-renders. Similarly, every time the React renders our application, so whenever the React renders our application, let me console this. It also creates the function itself. So fetch top repos in the GitHub is a function, and even though there is no change to this function, every time the definition of a function, every time React tries to render, it creates the function. So let me see if I have better results of this. Okay, and now we have defined our function, the fetch top repo, and every time I'm rendering our API, I'm rendering up my component, I want to fetch top repos. So let's do this. If you look at this, the top repo function was created and top repo function was ran. So now I have 3 extra API calls for top repo. Now I'm not displaying on the UI, but you guys can assume I could have had a top repo display component. Now let's do again the unrelated task of clicking on a button somewhere. And now you start to see I'm having this API calls, which are very expensive. In fact, if I did it multiple times, I start getting blocked from the GitHub. GitHub doesn't allow me to do more than 5 API calls per minute. And I already got my data, whatever I needed. I got my top repos. Still, because of an unrelated activity of clicking on a button, I kept calling the GitHub API because my top repos function kept getting invoked and kept getting recreated. So this can hurt your billing cycle as well as your application's performance as well. Anytime you're doing something extra in your application, it's a money cost to your company as well as money cost to your laptop via the electricity bill. React offers something called useCallback hook, which can use callback. So now we are introducing, let me write it where we wrote this previous. React offers something called use callback is for reducing number of function recreation. So we will tell to React, hey, please do not recreate my fetch top repo functions unless something has changed, which in our case, nothing changes. Top repos are top repos. Nothing is ever going to be changed, right? GitHub decides what top repos are, not our application. So we are telling React, please, in this format, but yeah. So we are telling React, please use callback hook to not recreate my top repo function if it doesn't need to. So let's go back after this change to our application. And let me refresh. Let me refresh the console and let me refresh. So I called my top repos. I got a network API call. There are two of them here. And now let me do the unrelated act of clicking on this button. That is no longer calling my API over and over. And how did we prevent calling the API over and over? Is by simply not recreating the top fetch top repos function over and over. So these are the three critical hooks and functions that React offers for us to reduce duplications and re-renders and function recreations. And when done right, these three things can be really powerful and help your application become blazing fast. So these are the three topics we have to cover today. I'll